Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Cal Naranya, and on episode 95 of the podcast, I will be reviewing, well, there's been a change to what I will be reviewing. If you followed on social media, you will have known. But if you haven't, and this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. I will be covering Doctor Who Series 14, and because Jermaine has asked for it, Jermaine, I got you. I haven't discussed The Boys yet, and we are halfway through Season 4, so what a perfect time to talk about it. I did see Bikeriders starring Austin Butler and Tom Hardy, and I don't have a ton to say, so if you're interested, don't worry. I will have a brief spoiler-free review at the end of the episode before listener mail. So, without further ado, let's jump into the first review of this week's episode, Doctor Who Series 14.
TARDIS stands for time and relative dimension in space. Huh? So we've moved location as well.
This will be North America.
I did cover the Christmas special, so if you were looking to hear what I thought about the church on Ruby Road, I did cover that back in, well, it might have been January, I'm not actually sure. But this is a spoiler-filled review of Series 14, the first full series that Russell T Davies has come back and been the showrunner for, and I'm not necessarily surprised by this, but I feel overall that it was a mixed bag, which shouldn't necessarily be shocking if you are a longtime fan of the modern era of Doctor Who. I am. I haven't watched almost any of the classic eras. And Season 1, well, so it's interesting. Follow along with me, I apologize. We're kind of going to be jumping all over the place. I will talk mainly about what I thought in general about each episode, and then the season-long arc, as well as the overall footing this series, that's what they're called, has in the lore of Doctor Who. Series 1 of Doctor Who shares a lot of similarities with Series 14 of Doctor Who. Russell tackles both of these series as an introduction to the character, the universe, the franchise, the lore, all of those, while not disregarding what had come before. He's expecting a lot of newer viewers and newer eyes on this show. Series 14 has a substantial amount of similarities in that it functions in the same way. You might see later on in the Question of the Week video, which will get posted later this week if you were listening to this on the day it's released. Hello. Which is that there are a lot of elements to introduce a lot of the aspects of what happens in a Doctor Who show, whether that's traveling through time and space or period pieces, aliens, all of the aspects you would expect from Doctor Who are all present. What is consistent with an introductory season of Doctor Who from Russell T Davies is avoiding a lot of the classic Doctor Who villains. For that, I really do appreciate it. It's been 14 years, if you include the different specials runs, 17, where if you're following along and you don't actually know what I'm talking about, I mean that where David Tennant, well, he's had 2 different runs of specials, mini movies to some regard, as well as Matt Smith having one and Jodie Whittaker, ironically Peter Capaldi being the only one who didn't, even though he had probably the largest gap between seasons or series. And I appreciate that. The function of this as a season 1, which is how it's been marketed by Disney+, it being outside of the 60th anniversary specials, the only season on Disney+. It's very weird in Canada. I know if you live in the UK, all of Doctor Who is available on BBC iPlayer, which is how I wish it was available here, but the rights seem to be all in different places. Series 1 to 10, so that's Christopher Eccleston, all the way through to Peter Capaldi's ending, are on Amazon Prime or Prime Video, and none of the Jodie Whittaker content is anywhere. There was a time when it was available on Crave here in Canada. I'm not sure how it's working in the States, but it is weird that there is not a unified area to watch all of Doctor Who in North America. Kind of frustrating, particularly because I have friends who have just gotten into the show with the 60th anniversary specials, and they can't watch all of it. I've had to loan out my Jodie Whittaker Blu-rays, which is fine. That's why I buy home video, which is why I'm grateful that I do that. Russell, I know that you've liked both of my Instagram posts about this. I know Disney Plus has the streaming rights, but I would really still like to purchase this show on physical because things eventually, over here anyways, get taken off of their streaming platforms. Okay, I'm done with that rant. There was questions leading into this if we were ever going to see the 14th Doctor starring David Tennant. We never do, which I'm grateful for. This show is absolutely Ncuti Gatwa's or the 15th Doctor's adventures, as well as Ruby Sunday, played by Millie Gibson. Let's talk about things that I didn't necessarily love, and then we'll end on positives. I think that's probably the best way to talk about the season as a whole. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. They're probably going to be woven all the way through. Let's kind of go through each episode one at a time. Space Babies is a fun introduction to the Doctor, showing the more caring nature that Ncuti's Doctor has. Children aren't necessarily somebody we see the Doctor with a lot. Now, I didn't finish my rewatch when leading up to the 60th anniversary specials. I got about halfway through Peter Capaldi's, and then other stuff comes up. If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you know how many things I'm watching for each week of the podcast, and so that didn't happen. An element of this season that I liked was we got to see, and this follows through all the episodes. I'm going to be jumping all over the place, so if you can't follow along, I apologize, but this is kind of how Kyle's brain is working when thinking of the show as a whole and in pieces, which is that we still get a lot of classic new attempts at new monsters, creatures, aliens, or whatnot in Doctor Who, which I really did appreciate. The best part of this Doctor, particularly after where we see the 15th in the giggle, is he has his emotions much more present. Which, well, I'm sure there are people who are arguing, well, the Doctor has certain emotions. Yes, but these are much more at the forefront of who the 15th Doctor is, which does succinctly make him different from the previous ones. There was concern, at least to some regard, on the internet that I saw, where people were concerned Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor was just going to be Eric from Sex Education, which he is absolutely not. I like that this Doctor is not afraid to cry, is not afraid to show all these different emotions. It is 2024, and having a stereotypical expectation of the expression of a male person's behaviors is nice to see. And Russell, for the forefront of the show, really does push forward that level of acceptance. He's always been somebody who's integrated that into his shows, and having it just be kind of present throughout a lot of the dialogue is something I'm sure is going to rub people the wrong way. But quite frankly, this Doctor is gay, or at minimum gay. And so him being interested in some of the other male characters is going to be a part of it. On the other side of it, if it was a male Doctor who was interested in women, it would be the same thing. And so in my personal opinion, I'm super happy to see that element of the Doctor's representation be forward or in the forefront, where it's just a part of who he is. It's not something he has to hide from, particularly Ruby Sundays or anybody else he interacts with, because the last thing you would want is for an actor who's playing the character who is, I'm not actually sure, I should probably look this up, but a character who is gay or queer to just be who they are and not have to closet those emotions. And that leads to one of the better episodes from this season in general for me, which was Rogue. There are some standouts that are going to be certainly easy to discuss in terms of the pantheon of great Doctor Who episodes. The balance of the overall season-long story, I don't think it works, and it's more interesting to me because there's been more criticism recently to how Russell handles season-long arcs and the evolution of his series 1, 2, 3, and 4, where I understand that he's been away from the show for a while, but you would think with somebody who knows how the sausage is made that he would know how to tackle these things. And unfortunately, while the overall reveals aren't necessarily jaw-dropping, I enjoyed the simplicity of that, particularly around who Ruby Sunday's mom is. Russell has said he was inspired to write Ruby Sunday after following Ray, which is interesting because Disney was afraid to make her just a regular person and wound up making her a Palpatine. And it'll be interesting to see in Series 15 if it turns out that there is more to Millie Gibson's Ruby Sunday than we do get in the finale. The reveal of the final villain of Sutekh is an interesting one. Again, I'm really glad that it is a character from Classic Who we had not yet seen in modern Doctor Who. It's been almost 20 years of this new era. However, the revelation that he's been around from the beginning, or from the ending of his last appearance, I did find quite funny, and the internet has had a field day with what that means and what he was around for. I would have preferred if there was a reason he got out. And I found that especially interesting given the fact that we know that superstition and gods are coming through, likely because of what the 14th Doctor did in Blue Yonder with invoking superstition. Yet that element either is ignored or is going to be coming up in Series 15. It isn't necessarily clear if that's the case, so is that set up for more? Russell T Davies has said, I believe it's in the video commentary on BBC iPlayer, that he viewed this as parts 1 and 2 because the 2 series were commissioned at the same time. So I would hope there would be distinction for that being the case, or lack thereof, but there isn't. So there's even more that's potentially unanswered, which is slightly frustrating. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Boom is a phenomenal episode, and it's great to see Stephen Moffat come in and do an incredible one-off again, where we get to see the Doctor really pushed to the nth degree in terms of what he's capable of because of the situation he's found himself in. 73 Yards was an episode that I really did enjoy. Getting an episode that focuses particularly on Ruby and what she would do without the Doctor is kind of the mainstay of the series. We typically get those from a budgetary standpoint, but if you're not in the know, this episode was made because Ncuti Gatwa was still tied up with other projects, and so they needed one that focused particularly on Ruby Sunday. And there's been discussion whether there's a deleted scene in this that does connect to the finale. Ultimately, I don't really know if it is the fact, because we didn't see that scene in the canon of the show. If it's deleted, then it technically doesn't count, or at least if it was referenced to, then it would as well. Dot and Bubble, a more Black Mirror-esque episode that talks about the detriment of social media and ending with a unfortunate realization that the colonists of this planet are racist. And an aspect of this character that is addressed, and if you were curious, yes, they do mention it, which is that Ncuti is black. And it becomes apparent that the survivors of this fine town are racially prejudiced, and we get a phenomenal monologue from the Doctor. And to me, in that moment, and a lot of people have discussed this as well, that is Ncuti's coming out party as the Doctor. Somebody who just wants to do the right thing, even though the people he's trying to save hate him. That is the Doctor. He wants to do the right thing no matter what. And having that be more than halfway through does cement Ncuti's Doctor amongst all of the others. Rogue being a Bridgerton episode, I'm not a fan of that television series. It is always fun to see something more period, and the costumes, which connects me to my next point, which is I thoroughly enjoy the outfit we see him in the Church on Ruby Road, and as well as the beginning and the end of this season or series, where it is the blue trousers with the vest, the knit vest, and the brown leather coat and the trainers or running shoes. I think that's a great look for the Doctor, and having him consistently be in other outfits, I understand that to some degree they're going to potentially use their budget to have Ncuti in more costumes, but an aspect, and a friend of mine brought this to my attention, that I don't think I'd actually ever thought before, which is the Doctor is so concerned with other things that he doesn't think to change his clothes, and therefore that's why he is consistently has an outfit. One of my favorite elements to distinctly put the Doctors apart from each other is their choice of uniform, for lack of a better description. And Ncuti being in his so infrequently, that to me was kind of annoying. I really do like his connection to Jonathan Groff in The Rogue. It was fun to see another creature in the show that's more humanoid based, and the developing the relationship between him and Ruby, which is, I would say, accelerated to some point. This could be because the show is only 8 episodes long, as opposed to even 10, 13, or 12 that we're used to. So the relationship is not thoroughly developed as much as we would have seen in the past, particularly because we have, as I said already, 73 Yards, which is an episode the Doctor is barely in at all. And with Ruby in mind, the culmination of the finale, where we learn that Susan was planted throughout time because of Sutek, I believe is how it's pronounced, the god of death, which is reminiscent, ironically, to Clara Oswald and her jumping into the Doctor's time stream and being everywhere. And you would think because the Doctor had experienced that already, that would come up, but it doesn't. We just have the other character, Mrs. Flood, dressed like Clara, so maybe that'll come up later. We aren't given any answers to her overall. I think the finale is fine. It does feel rushed to some degree because of it being 8 episodes and them having to handle so many things. The significance of Ruby's mom is a great mystery for Ruby, but the show presents it in a way where it's more mythic than it necessarily needs to be. And it's been pointed out that if she was pointing to the sign to name Ruby, that nobody would see that. She knows that she dropped Ruby off at the church by herself. So I don't really know why those choices were made. I would like to know what the circumstances were around all of the writing for this. It lists Russell T Davies as the main writer for all the episodes, but it is by far not the worst season of Doctor Who, certainly not the worst introductory series of Doctor Who with a new Doctor. I still think there are seasons that are worse. I still think there are seasons that are better. The main selling point for me with this season or series overall is, does it sell and work with the companion and the Doctor? And it absolutely does that. If you needed a revitalization of Doctor Who with more modern sensibilities and a modern budget, that is something that I definitely should not mention, which is, with that Disney Plus money, the show certainly looks much better from a production design standpoint, visual effects, and whatnot. Sutek looks incredible, and people have been comparing it to something from Scooby-Doo, which I found kind of funny. But as a new series with the Doctor, after it's been quite a bit since the last real series of the show, I'm excited, and I'm very curious to see what is going to be left over from Series 14 and what's going to be connected to Series 15. If you did watch the show, please let me know on social media. I'm on all the stuff, as well as the podcast is on all the stuff. That will do it for my spoiler review of Doctor Who Series 14. Let's jump into my review of the first half of The Boys Season 4.
The whole world is about to burn.
We need someone like you, Billy, before the soups start rounding us up and dumping us off in camps.
Season 4 of The Boys pretty much kicks off where we were at Season 3. The first half, at least, doesn't have the same momentum, where my brain wants to keep calling them series. Season 3 had this thrust because of Soldier Boy and somebody who could actually kill Homelander, and then the mystery behind what had happened to him was really great plot elements, but it maintained this quite frantic pace to the ultimate conclusion at the end. And in Series 4, I did it again. In Season 4, what I'm really curious about is an element that this season introduces, is that Homelander's aging. He's probably a guy who's actually in his mid-40s, and facing his literal mortality at the end of Season 3, what is that going to mean for him moving forward? And the relationship he has with Butcher is even more interesting because Ryan, his biological son, has said he can't harm Butcher. So the back and forth that they have is really, really fun to watch because there is this tension. Obviously, they both want to kill each other, but they both don't. Well, I mean, Butcher can't, he no longer has powers, but Homelander won't because it is so important to him to have this relationship with Ryan so that way he can mold him into into essentially a Homelander Jr. Another main plot element that ends with quite a cliffhanger at the end of season, I want to call it the season, but it's just episode. Episode 4 is Huey's dad having a stroke and him mysteriously coming out of it at the end. But we have that battle of the use of V and how it's affecting regular people. Homelander now has a stockpile of it in his office. He is essentially at this point running Vought and brings in Sister Sage, the smartest person on earth, somebody who's not afraid to talk to him. But the dynamic she has is one that's particularly interesting given the political references that The Boys has always been present, but each season, unfortunately, is a more and more faithful reflection of what politics, particularly in North America, have become, where the message is everything and you don't actually have a platform anymore. It's just who do you hate and why you shouldn't vote for them, unfortunately. And Sister Sage being somebody who could likely be the smartest person on earth, but as opposed to being somebody who is on the path of the righteous or the good, is just an awful human being and is likely using all of these people to her own end goals. And the fact that she actually has to make herself more dumb or stupid by squishing around her frontal lobe of her brain is absolutely disgusting, and something we do see her get the Deep to do for her in episode 4. I don't think this has the momentum of season 3. As I said, I really did like that season. A lot of the first half of season 4 feels like laying out a lot of substantial building blocks that we are going to eventually build to the conclusion with. There's only so much time that we are going to have in this season. We know Billy's going to die. It's probably not going to happen in this season. What would be the point of that? But that also affects what they're able to do in this time frame. Mother's Milk, or MM, is now running The Boys and doesn't seem to have the same cutthroat decision making that Butcher has. So the back and forth between them is a new dynamic that we haven't necessarily seen before. My favorite storyline of the show so far has been Annie's relationship with Firecracker. It being one that is brewed out of Annie being a rude teenager, likely because of the poor parenting she got from her mom in that, what do they call them? The pageant circuit. But at the same time, Firecracker is absolutely broken as a human being. It revealed in episode 4 that she had relations with an underage person. And the fact that it's just completely disregarded by her zealot fan base is unfortunate. That's probably how that would be treated. There's literally a felon running for president in the United States right now. Keep your politics out of my film realist. Well, I live in Canada, and I can't say it's much better, but maybe it is a little bit. I don't know. That depends on who you ask. And so I don't feel that the conclusion necessarily to the end of this season is as obvious as it was with season 3, which is a good and a bad for me. I'm curious where we are going to go. Is the ultimate conclusion to this or physical altercation going to be between some of the new people? Are the new people going to get killed off as easily as they were before? We know that we lost... My brain just turned to mush. She was the Wonder Woman of the previous season, and because she's not in this season at all, I have completely forgotten what her name is. What was her name? I'm looking at it now. Where is it? I'm sorry that I'm just killing time. Maeve. Maeve has disappeared, and I'm assuming will likely come back. If this show doesn't have a sort of everybody has flipped and we just wind up killing Homelander, I'd be a little bit disappointed. But what's an element that I'm really glad was introduced, because it adds an aspect of the show where the characters we're always used to characters seeing things that aren't there, but because of Butcher's exposure to temporary V, and then what seems to be more that we didn't see off screen but were shown later on as a flashback with his conversation with Huey, that something is living inside him and likely resulted in Billy still being capable of powers and having these hallucinations of his dead wife, who is leading most of the decisions that he's making. And is that going to come to the forefront? He hasn't told them that's what's happening. So I'm really curious to seeing what goes on with that. A-Train is slowly stepping closer and closer to the side of the boys, particularly with his relationships with his family being affected by the negative impact of being one of the 7. So that I'm curious. We do get more between him and Huey, which I liked. That being what was so shocking in the very first episode of this show, how that's been brought forward in Huey's relationship with him. And yeah, I really am enjoying it. However, it does feel to some degree like we are spinning our wheels a little bit. Halfway through the season, I don't really know where we're going. We've have newer characters who've been brought to the forefront. Annie has fought in Firecracker and beaten her up, which has affected the laws that the president wants to pass that would prevent Soups from being involved in all aspects of daily life in the United States. So I don't really know if my guess would be this leads to Newman becoming president and that coming to a head with Homelander in season 5. That's a guess that I have that I feel like is more likely. We have Homelander revisiting more of his childhood, and I'm really curious where we're going to go. I think it's intriguing enough. I wouldn't say I'm enjoying the season as much as I did season 3. Now, having said that, I have seen the whole season. So with the remaining 4 weeks, I'm quite curious to seeing where we go. The show's still captivating to me, so if you're watching it on Prime Video, you can let me know what you thought about it on all the socials. Now let's jump into my very brief review of Bikeriders and listener mail. All right, so really briefly, what did I think about Bikeriders? I thought Bikeriders was a really good movie. It offers an interesting perspective into the relationships amongst biker community. Now, I'm sure it's not a fair representation of everybody, but the film presents an interesting escalation of those relationships and how violence quite often becomes escalated because of the relationships that these people build with each other. Tom Hardy is great. I don't know what accent he's doing. Austin Butler, while still to some degree still doing his Elvis accent, has great chemistry with Jodie Comer, who functions as the narrator to this show or film. And I liked seeing Mike Faced, I'm not actually sure how to say that, as the photographer / audio recorder and establishing those relationships through the different interviews that he has. And ultimately, I would assume we are getting the story in the way that it's constructed through his interviews, which is interesting enough. It's a good movie to see on the big screen. It certainly brought out a crowd I have not seen at your simple blockbuster throughout 2024, which is good to see. It seems like it had an okay opening weekend. Austin Butler still kind of doing the Elvis a little bit is a little bothersome, but it is good to see him stretch himself and play a different character. Jodie Comer's accent is absolutely hilarious, but regardless, I enjoyed the film. I think it will certainly do really well on streaming. It's not revolutionary in its representation of biker culture. It's not something that I would know even remotely about, but if you'd watch something like Sons of Anarchy, I'd say it doesn't get as extreme as that, but at the same time presents its own narrative with the biker community in the late 50s, early 60s, and then early 70s. So it's worth a watch. I would recommend checking it out. I just don't have a ton to say, so this is all I'm going to say about it right now. Now, the last week's question of the week was, what do you think is the best Pixar film? So let's see what your responses were. Paige on TikTok said Toy Story 2. Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die said best Pixar sequel to me has to be Toy Story 3. Was nearly crying as a high schooler with my friends. Would have been a perfect ending if we didn't keep pumping out more. I think that's fair. Toy Story 3 from Stephanie, but special mention to Monsters University. The mom sitting in the van listening to Screamo rock lives rent-free in my brain. Scotty Cameron said Toy Story 2 or 3. James Strecker, Finding Dory, Incredibles 2, Toy Stories 3 or 4, Cars 2 or 3. Yeah, it's got to be Toy Story. When one came out, my mom was reviewing movies for the newspaper, and she said it was the first time she'd seen a sequel that was on par with the original. He's referencing Toy Story 2. And Jermaine said, you're the only one who said this, Jermaine. Oh, first of all, thank you, Jermaine. Says, Kyle, your kids did a great job. And how isn't Incredibles 2 not the best? In my opinion, the best sequel is Toy Story 2. Toy Story 3 is my personal favorite. So that is the responses that we got from last week's question of the week. This week's question of the week is, what is your favorite series of Doctor Who? So going all the way back to the first series with Christopher Eccleston, so this is in the modern run, all the way to series 14 with Ncuti Gatwa. Is your favorite series your favorite? Does it have your favorite Doctor? I'm really curious if those things line up. For myself personally, it doesn't, but you'll have to wait till next week's episode to find out. Speaking of that, next week's episode will be a review of A Quiet Place Day 1. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can comment and subscribe on all the different platforms. I do see them all. Please leave a 5-star review if you loved this podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.